Welcome, gentle traveler of the night, to a quiet voyage through the timeless echoes of our shared past. As the world around you stills and your body begins to relax, I invite you to sink into a state of peace, letting go of the day's worries. Perhaps you are nestled under a cozy blanket, lying still in a softly lit room, or reclined on a comfortable couch where shadows stretch lazily across the floor. Wherever you are, allow my voice to be a gentle thread that weaves your consciousness backward through the centuries. Before we set off into this story of splendor and struggle, take a slow, deliberate breath. Inhale through your nose and exhale gently through your mouth. With each breath, feel your body grow heavier, your thoughts lighter. Inhale calm, exhale tension. And as you breathe, begin to imagine the blank canvas behind your eyelids, an endless, velvety backdrop awaiting the soft brushstrokes of your imagination. Let the colors of history paint themselves gently across that inner space. Let the tale begin. Tonight, we journey into the heart of medieval Europe, a world that stretched across the centuries. From the collapse of Rome in the 5th century to the awakening of the Renaissance in the 15th. This was a time of contrasts, where deep devotion lived side by side with fearful superstition, where moments of progress were often swallowed by war and disease, and where power, cloaked in royal regalia, walked in both splendor and sorrow. Within this ever-changing world, a caste of kings and queens stood at the center of history, cloaked in velvet, burdened by crowns, and carrying the weight of realms upon their shoulders. When we imagine these rulers of old, our minds may first conjure images of glittering courts, roaring feasts, and banners fluttering over high castle towers. We picture grand banquets, elaborate dances, and quiet power plays whispered between bejeweled nobles. But beneath the surface of this imagined opulence lies a more nuanced truth, a royal life filled with duty, sacrifice, and the steady pull of responsibility. As your breath continues in its soft, steady rhythm, and your limbs grow heavy with relaxation, I ask you to slip into the embroidered slippers of a medieval monarch. Let the world of your current day fall away as you step into the role of a ruler, be it a prince, a princess, a queen, or a king, born into privilege, yes, but tethered to the weighty chains of custom and expectation. You were not free to drift aimlessly, for every decision you made rippled across the fates of your people. Every alliance, every decree, every look cast across a council table had meaning. And so tonight, we explore what life might have felt like behind the stone walls of grand castles, behind heavy doors, velvet curtains, and ceremonial smiles. We'll tread quietly through corridors lit by flickering torchlight, pause in echoing chapels where incense still clings to the air, and peek into private chambers where monarchs laid their crowned heads each night. Let us begin where each royal day both began and ended, in the royal bedchamber. Picture it now, dawn arriving as a soft glimmer through narrow arrow-slit windows. The stone walls still cool from the night's touch. A fire, long reduced to embers, breathes warmth back into the great chamber. The scent of oak smoke, beeswax candles, and fresh rushes fills the air. There, beneath an elaborately carved canopy of oak, a king and queen stir gently, wrapped in furs and heavy linens. Their sleep is disturbed not by a rooster's crow, but by the soft knock of a servant at the chamber door, the groom of the stool, an official of surprising importance, arriving to assist the king with his private morning rituals. Carefully, layer by layer, the king is washed, dried, and dressed in garments chosen not just for comfort or fashion, but for what they symbolize: rank, dignity, divine right. Nearby, the queen's own attendants, the ladies of the chamber, flutter about like birds, brushing her hair, fastening her gown, offering quiet compliments and calculated courtesies. Once the royal couple is adorned, they move to a smaller, candle-lit chapel nestled within the castle's walls. There, kneeling on embroidered cushions, they whisper prayers in Latin, their voices softened by years of repetition. Incense coils through the air as they ask for wisdom, health, and victory, if not for themselves, then for the kingdom. This pious start is not merely spiritual, it reinforces their role as moral leaders, chosen by God to guide their people. Their faith must be visible, tangible, unquestionable. And yet, even as their prayers rise, their minds are already shifting to the matters of court and kingdom waiting just beyond the chapel door. The rest of the day unfolds in a carefully choreographed rhythm, audiences granted to foreign envoys, disputes heard in the Great Hall, letters penned to distant allies. Pages scurry through stone corridors with messages bearing wax seals still warm. Nobles wait in antechambers, eyes full of ambition, fingers heavy with rings. Meals, though grand in appearance, are occasions of etiquette, not leisure, with strict protocols governing who may sit where and speak when. Behind the laughter and lute music, every glance carries hidden meaning, every toast is laced with strategy. And yet, amidst this parade of ceremonial duties and political maneuverings, moments of human emotion remain. A shared glance between spouses. A quiet sigh after a council meeting. A stolen moment of solitude by a sunlit window. Few monarchs encapsulate the paradox of royal life more fully than Eleanor of Aquitaine, queen, mother, rebel, and regent. Born into extraordinary privilege in 1122, Eleanor inherited the vast and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine, making her one of the most sought-after brides in Europe. At just 15, she married Prince Louis of France, ascending to queenship within months. But Louis, devout and scholarly, was ill-matched with the spirited and worldly Eleanor. Their marriage, though adorned in glory, quickly soured. Still, Eleanor was no passive consort. In an unprecedented move, she accompanied Louis on the Second Crusade, leading her own retinue of knights and servants through the perilous journey to the Holy Land. Dressed in armor and mounted upon a white steed, she became legend. But the crusade ended in failure, and the rift between queen and king grew insurmountable. Citing consanguinity, a legal pretext for annulment based on shared ancestry, they parted ways after 15 turbulent years. Yet Eleanor's story did not end with this royal separation. Just 2 months later, she wed the young and ambitious Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy, soon to be King Henry II of England. Their union brought together vast territories and birthed what would later be called the Angevin Empire. Over the years, Eleanor bore Henry 8 children, among them 2 future kings, Richard the Lionheart and John Lackland. But domestic peace was not their fate. Henry was an unfaithful and controlling husband, and Eleanor, no longer content to be sidelined, encouraged her sons to rise against him. Their rebellion failed, and Eleanor paid dearly for it, spending 16 years in captivity, shuttled from castle to castle, her influence curtailed, her freedom stripped away. And yet, she endured. When Henry died in 1189, their son Richard ascended the throne and freed his mother. At the age of 67, Eleanor returned to political life with fervor, ruling in her son's stead while he campaigned abroad. She arranged marriages, negotiated treaties, and maintained the delicate balance of power in a realm always on the brink of upheaval. She would live to see her youngest son John crowned king, her legacy interwoven with the fabric of English and French history. Eleanor of Aquitaine remains a towering figure not because she was flawless, but because she was human, resilient, clever, ambitious, and fiercely alive. And as your own breath slows further, your eyelids now heavier than before, allow Eleanor's story to linger gently in your mind. Imagine her pacing a stone balcony by moonlight, her velvet cloak rustling softly, the torchlight painting flickers on the walls. Perhaps, like you, she once gazed into the night and wondered what dreams might come. Let your mind drift now, unburdened. Let it float beside the shadows of kings and queens, through candlelit corridors and whispered prayers. Breathe in and breathe out, and know that behind every crown lay a mind much like your own, seeking meaning, peace, and rest. As we continue to drift through the gilded corridors of medieval memory, let us remain by the side of Eleanor of Aquitaine, a figure whose life, longer and more layered than most of her royal peers, reveals the true weight of a crown and the astonishing resilience of the woman beneath it. When she emerged from her long imprisonment after Henry II's death, Eleanor might have retreated into quiet retirement. But instead, she stepped back into power with a steady hand and unwavering focus. Her son Richard, though a celebrated warrior and crusader, spent little time in England. And so it was Eleanor, well into her late 60s, who oversaw the realm in his absence. She moved through cities and strongholds, managing affairs of state, smoothing over quarrels between lords, and ensuring that the kingdom did not fracture under the weight of uncertainty. Few would have expected a woman of her age, long silenced by confinement, to return with such vigor and command. But Eleanor was no ordinary sovereign, and the years had only sharpened her sense of purpose. Richard's reign was marked by glory abroad and turmoil at home. Captured and held for ransom during his return from the Crusades, the kingdom trembled with anxiety and confusion. Yet it was Eleanor who once again stepped forward, raising the staggering sum demanded for his release, coordinating efforts across regions, appealing to allies, and proving that even from the shadows, she remained a queen of immense capability. Her son's eventual return to the throne was a triumph not only of diplomacy but of maternal devotion. One imagines Eleanor in these moments not with a crown of gold, but with one of resolve, a queen whose strength was measured not in jewels but in wisdom and endurance. And still, history's tide did not pause. When Richard died, it was John, Eleanor's youngest son, who inherited the throne. His reputation would later become mired in legend and controversy, but in those early days of his reign, Eleanor was there once more to guide, to intervene, and to protect what remained of the vast empire she had helped to shape. Even into her 70s, she took on difficult journeys, one of which brought her across the Pyrenees to select a bride for her grandson, securing alliances and stabilizing lines of inheritance. That a woman so advanced in years would take on such arduous duties speaks to her unyielding dedication to both family and state. Her death in 1204, at the age of 82, marked the end of a remarkable era. By the standards of her time, hers was a lifespan not just long, but legendary. And yet, it was not length alone that distinguished Eleanor's life. It was the tapestry of experiences she wove, the kingdoms she helped bind together, and the cultural imprint she left on Europe's soul. In her youth, she brought poetry and refinement to the often brutish court of France. As Queen of England, she extended that influence even further, championing the arts, encouraging the development of courtly love, and supporting troubadours whose songs would echo for generations. In her role as regent, she governed with discernment and diplomacy. And through it all, she navigated betrayal, heartbreak, power struggles, and immense personal loss. Hers was not a fairy tale, it was something far more meaningful. It was a chronicle of courage. As you breathe slowly now, deeply, letting your chest rise and fall in a calming rhythm, imagine Eleanor sitting beside the hearth in her final years. The flicker of firelight dances across her lined face, casting shadows on the stone walls of Fontevraud Abbey. Perhaps she gazes quietly at a carved wooden box of letters from her sons, or a simple rosary worn smooth by years of prayer. The air carries a faint aroma of herbs drying for winter, and somewhere in the distance, a monk's chant hums low like the steady heartbeat of time itself. In this hush, surrounded by the silence of age and memory, Eleanor closes her eyes, her life, so filled with noise and battle and splendor, finally settling into peace. She was a monarch, a mother, a strategist, and a symbol. But more than anything, she was proof that even within a rigid world of masculine rule and expectations, a woman's will could still move mountains. And so we widen our gaze again, dear dreamer, and wander gently into the lives of other kings and queens who ruled before and after her, so many of whom bore the same gilded responsibilities, though few left such an enduring mark. For in medieval courts, royalty was as much performance as power. A monarch was expected to be all things to all people, a warrior on the battlefield, a priest in the chapel, a sage in council, and a figurehead for the masses. The weight of this role was crushing, even for the strongest of souls. From the moment of coronation to their final breath, rulers lived under constant scrutiny. Every gesture was steeped in symbolism. Every garment, every word, every expression bore the burden of expectation. And yet, amidst the splendor and pageantry, they too were human. When the torches were extinguished and the great halls quieted, kings and queens found themselves alone with their thoughts, their doubts, their private hopes. Their days might be filled with ceremony, but their nights, like yours, belonged to reflection. Take, for instance, Queen Philippa of Hainaut, wife of Edward III. A model of devotion and political acumen, Philippa was beloved by the English people for her compassion and steadiness. Throughout her life, she gave birth to 12 children, navigated the chaos of war and regency, and served as a moderating influence on her husband, who, though valiant, could be impetuous. When Edward was away waging the 100 Years' War, it was Philippa who managed affairs of state, soothed internal unrest, and ensured the realm continued to function. She did so with grace and kindness, avoiding scandal and winning respect in a time when women were often seen and rarely heard. Yet even her seemingly blessed life was marked by sorrow. Many of her children did not survive to adulthood. She spent long stretches separated from her family. And despite her faithful heart, her husband, like so many kings, eventually turned to another. Still, Philippa endured, her legacy woven not only through her children but through the culture of peace and civility she fostered at court. In her later years, she became the symbol of royal virtue, revered not for conquest, but for compassion. Imagine now, as your breath continues to slow, the Queen in her private chambers. Perhaps she sits at a writing desk, penning a letter to her son on the front lines. Her lap is warmed by a gentle spaniel, her hair pinned in soft curls. She wears not a crown, but a woolen shawl embroidered by hand. And outside her window, the winds of autumn carry leaves across the garden paths. A bell tolls in the distance, announcing the evening service, and for a moment, all is still. No war, no court, no duty, just the hush of twilight and the Queen's quiet thoughts. This glimpse into Philippa's life, like Eleanor's, reminds us that behind every royal portrait, every statue carved in alabaster, there once lived a person, someone who grieved and rejoiced, who feared and hoped, who dreamed under the same stars that twinkle now above your resting form. And so, as you lie still, wrapped in the quiet of this present moment, let your thoughts gently wander through the corridors of memory. Inhale softly, exhale slowly. Let the stories of the past become your lullaby, each whispered word a thread in the vast tapestry of human experience. These kings and queens, for all their titles and trappings, were never far removed from the very essence that makes us all alike, the desire to live, to love, to be remembered. Let this story rest with you now, like a warm blanket of centuries. Tomorrow will arrive soon enough. But tonight, you are free to drift peacefully through time, cradled by tales of royal lives lived in full measure, flawed, magnificent, and profoundly human. As we glide further through this quiet corridor of time, imagine the castle falling silent again after the bustle of the day. Servants have retreated behind wooden doors, the laughter of courtiers has faded into memory, and the great stone halls now echo only with the faint crackling of hearth fires and the sighing breath of the wind brushing past stained glass windows. The sovereigns, so often seen as larger than life, have set aside their crowns for the night, their ceremonial robes replaced by soft linen and fur-lined robes. In this hush, we linger not in the throne room or council chamber, but in the spaces where the mask of monarchy slips and reveals the human heart beneath. One such heart belonged to King Louis IX of France, known to later generations as Saint Louis. In life, he was both revered and criticized for his unwavering devotion to his faith, a man who sought not only to lead but to live as an example of piety. Unlike many of his contemporaries who indulged in feasts and folly, Louis fasted regularly, wore rough shirts beneath his velvet to remind himself of humility, and opened his palace gates to the poor. More than once, he was known to dine with commoners, not for spectacle, but out of a genuine belief that service and sacrifice were the highest duties of a monarch. He led not one, but 2 crusades, both ending in disaster. He died far from home, in the heat of a foreign land, stricken with illness and surrounded by dust and despair. Yet his legacy endured because of what he stood for, a vision of kingship as moral stewardship, a sacred responsibility rather than a privilege. To this day, his image is etched in cathedral stone, cloaked in simplicity and sanctity. And yet, for every saintly king, history offers a counterpart who drifted far from such ideals. The reign of Henry VIII in England, several centuries later, provides a sharp contrast. Henry's story is one of immense ambition, volcanic passions, and relentless pursuit of control. While Louis IX aligned his rule with heaven's order, Henry famously fractured it, splitting from the Catholic Church to secure his personal desire for a male heir. His 6 marriages, the execution of wives, and the dissolution of monasteries mark his rule as both revolutionary and ruthless. Still, beneath the drama, one finds a deeply human craving, the hunger to be remembered, to forge a legacy that would outlast the man. And indeed, centuries later, his name remains spoken more than most. Henry's life may have been one of excess, but it was also one of vulnerability cloaked in strength, of fear disguised as fury. These contrasts among monarchs, between humility and hubris, piety and passion, reveal the kaleidoscopic nature of royal existence. No 2 rulers wore their crowns the same way. The crown itself, that circlet of gold and glittering gems, may seem a symbol of triumph to those who gaze upon it from afar. But to the one who must bear it, its weight is far more than physical. It is a burden of expectation, of divine mandate, of endless scrutiny. A monarch was not permitted to falter in public, not even for a moment. Their every gesture was measured, their every silence interpreted. And in those moments when the grand doors were shut and the last attendant had bowed away, what remained was solitude, the kind that echoes louder than any crowd. Picture a king sitting at the edge of his bed, fingertips pressed to his temple as the final embers of the hearth begin to fade. Outside the high window, stars shimmer over distant fields. Below, guards pace the ramparts, their armor glinting faintly in torchlight. He is alone with the choices of the day, with memories that surface unbidden, with thoughts he dare not speak aloud. No audience. No court. Just a man trying to do what he believes is right, for his people, for his family, for his God. So too, we must not forget the women who bore the title of queen, not just consorts or adornments to a king's rule, but sovereigns in their own right, sometimes by inheritance, other times by circumstance or sheer will. Empress Matilda, daughter of King Henry I of England, stands among these remarkable figures. Groomed from a young age to lead, she became empress through marriage to the Holy Roman Emperor and was later declared heir to the English throne. Yet her path was strewn with obstacles. Upon her father's death, her claim was contested and a long, bitter civil war erupted. Matilda, though fierce and intelligent, was never crowned queen. But her determination did not waver. Her son would one day reign as King Henry II, and through him, her bloodline would shape the very course of English history. What Matilda could not win for herself, she secured for her progeny, a different kind of victory, perhaps the more enduring kind. The lives of royal women were laced with paradox. They were celebrated and silenced, honored and ignored, bound by duty and yet expected to wield quiet influence. Many were married off at a tender age to foreign rulers, traded like political tokens to cement alliances or secure borders. Their personal feelings mattered little in the larger game of dynasties and diplomacy. But within these constraints, many queens carved out legacies of their own. They patronized the arts, built abbeys, raised children who would rule nations, and in the hush of their private chambers, they wrote letters, hundreds of them, that revealed their wit, sorrow, ambition, and love. As your breathing grows softer now, your chest rising and falling in harmony with the stillness around you, let these royal stories become like waves, lapping gently at the edge of your consciousness. These were real lives once. Real voices. Real joys and griefs. You are not just hearing tales from the past, you are inhabiting them, walking briefly beside figures who lived centuries ago but longed, just as you do, for meaning and connection. Think now of a princess in her chamber, her window facing a snowy courtyard. She holds a letter from her mother, full of advice, warnings, love, and though she wears silk, her eyes brim with tears. The court is bustling outside, but in this moment, she is simply a daughter, wishing for warmth, for reassurance, for something beyond ceremony. Or imagine a young prince, yet to come of age, standing beside a marble basin, watching his own reflection tremble in the water. He has been told that one day he will rule, but no one has explained what that truly means. He wants to be brave. He wants to be wise. But tonight, he wishes only to be a boy, unburdened by legacy. These were the hidden moments of medieval monarchy, the ones not written in history books or carved into cathedral walls. They are the whispers behind the trumpets, the tears behind the crown. And though they lived in times so different from ours, their humanity binds us across the centuries. So breathe in deeply now, and exhale gently. Let your mind float, featherlight, through corridors dimly lit by torchlight. Let your heart drift toward those forgotten chambers where kings and queens once laid down to rest. Listen closely, and perhaps you'll hear them still, the rustle of velvet, the creak of old wood, the soft hush of a prayer whispered into the night. They are not gone. Not really. They live on in story, in stone, in memory, and in you, as you dream. And now, as your body softens even further and the weight of wakefulness begins to dissolve into the darkness around you, let us continue walking gently through the pages of time. The moon outside may be full and bright, but within these ancient walls, lit only by the faint flicker of oil lamps and the slow burn of hearth coals, a hush has fallen. The court has retired. The guards have rotated posts. Even the pages and scullions are asleep in their narrow beds. This is the hour when memory awakens and stories echo like whispers along the tapestried corridors of long-forgotten castles. Tonight, we return once more to the legacy of Eleanor of Aquitaine, not to repeat her tale but to fully inhabit it, to feel what it may have been like to stand at the threshold of history, holding in your hands the fate of kingdoms and sons alike. Born to extraordinary privilege and ambition, Eleanor lived a life that could fill volumes, and indeed it has. But she was also part of a broader world, a world shaped by traditions as heavy as the stone walls of the castles she inhabited. To understand her life more deeply, we must also understand the lives of those around her, her daughters, whose marriages were brokered as tools of diplomacy, her rivals, who jockeyed for position at court, and the countless queens and princesses who, like her, were born into gilded cages of dynastic expectation. In Eleanor's time, a royal daughter was rarely allowed to grow into adulthood before her destiny was carved in stone. Often betrothed while still a child, she was educated not only in courtly manners and piety, but in how to serve as an instrument of statecraft. Her smile might soothe a fractured alliance, her fertility might cement a treaty. She would be expected to charm, to conceive, and to remain silent when politics demanded it. And so many of them did, learning early the art of diplomacy with lowered lashes and practiced modesty. Yet within those quiet roles, some left powerful marks. Consider Eleanor's own daughters, Marie and Alix, born of her first marriage to King Louis VII of France. Though little is known about their inner lives, we know they were raised in the rarefied air of court, trained to uphold the image of royal grace, and dispatched, when the time was right, to marry as their status demanded. Their mother, by then no stranger to the transactional nature of matrimony, would have known well the hopes and perils such unions carried. Perhaps she prayed that they would be loved. More likely, she hoped they would be respected, or at least survive. The world of medieval royalty was often painted with brushstrokes of splendor, glittering banquets, embroidered silks, mounted hunts through golden woods. And yet beneath those scenes was a lattice of restrictions. A queen was expected to be beautiful, devout, prolific, and obedient, an impossibly fragile pedestal to stand on. And should she stumble, the fall was swift and unforgiving. Isabella of France, wife to Edward II of England, serves as one such cautionary figure. Married young into a volatile court, she watched her husband grow ever more attached to his favorites, men whose influence over the king bred jealousy and fury among the nobility. Isabella, sidelined and humiliated, eventually fled to her homeland, gathering allies to challenge Edward's rule. With her lover, Roger Mortimer, she returned to England not as queen consort but as a conqueror. They overthrew Edward, forced his abdication, and ruled briefly in the name of her son. But power is a treacherous flame. Mortimer was soon executed, and Isabella was confined to a life of quiet exile. Her rise and fall serve as a stark reminder: even queens who dared to seize control often paid dearly for their ambition. And yet the royal court was not always so grim. It could also be a theater of enchantment, a place where poetry bloomed, where music drifted through arched halls, where games of wit and flirtation were played between dances and diplomatic audiences. Some queens, like Eleanor and her granddaughter Blanche of Castile, turned their courts into havens for artists, philosophers, and scribes. The troubadours of Aquitaine, nurtured by Eleanor's patronage, composed verses that still echo with longing and chivalry. These lyrics, sung in candlelit chambers, were both escapism and commentary, an idealized version of love and virtue, whispered between women whose real lives bore the weight of arranged marriages and silent endurance. As your eyelids now flutter like moth wings, beginning to surrender to sleep's embrace, imagine these women in their world, not as silent figures on a tapestry, but as real individuals who walked corridors at dusk, who whispered confessions to trusted ladies in waiting, who wept for lost children and longed for peace in their homes and hearts. Let your imagination open its door to them. Picture Queen Margaret of Anjou, striding with steel resolve through a torchlit courtyard, dressed not in flowing silk but in battle armor, ready to defend her son's claim in the Wars of the Roses. Picture her sleepless nights, pacing before dawn, listening to the wind scrape across leaded glass as she weighs decisions that could cost hundreds of lives. These were not merely ceremonial women, they were stateswomen, mothers, warriors, dreamers. Let your breath deepen once more. Inhale slowly and let it fall. Feel the rhythm settle into your body. As you do, picture the shifting of history like pages turning in an illuminated manuscript. The delicate script of each royal's life dances across the parchment, lines filled with triumph, despair, love, betrayal, and unyielding grace. Between these lines, so many human truths persist. The fear of failure. The desire to be seen. The ache for affection. The pride in a child's success. All of these still pulse behind the stiff brocade and gilded crowns. Royal sons, too, carried burdens that few could comprehend. Often raised at a remove from their mothers, they were trained in the arts of war, diplomacy, and rhetoric from an early age. A prince might be handed a sword before he was taught to write. He would be told, again and again, that one day the realm would be his, and with it, the weight of an entire people's fate. What does that do to a child's heart? To live under the constant shadow of expectation? Some rose to the challenge with nobility. Others cracked beneath it. Some became tyrants, while others fled from the very idea of power. In your mind's eye, see one such boy, perhaps John, youngest of Eleanor's sons, who grew up in the immense shadow of his elder brother, Richard. While Richard was hailed as a lionheart, John was dismissed, underestimated, and eventually feared. His story is one of complexity, often cast in darkness. But once, he too was a child. Once, he too looked out across the moors with a dream in his chest. Once, he laughed with his nursemaid, learned to ride, sat at his tutor's knee. The seed of kingship is planted early, but it grows in unpredictable ways. And so, dear dreamer, as your own thoughts begin to drift far from the waking world, Let these royal lives float beside you like petals on a stream. Their stories are not so far removed from yours. Their triumphs and tribulations may have unfolded on grander stages, but at the heart of it all, they were human beings walking uncertain paths in a world that asked more of them than they sometimes could give. Let your breath fall into its natural rhythm. Let the story now dissolve into silence. The castles still stand, though many have crumbled. The crowns may be locked away in glass, but the souls who wore them still flicker behind the curtain of time, not as rulers, but as people who loved, who hoped, who sought meaning in the roles they inherited. Let your body be still now. Let your mind be free. The story sleeps, and so may you. Let us now drift further along the quiet corridors of memory, where the dust of ages glimmers softly in the half-light of thought, and the tapestries of royal life wave gently in the breeze of dream. As your breath moves slower, calmer, and more fluid with the hush of night, imagine us stepping once more into the halls of medieval kings and queens, not as outsiders peering through a glass case of history, but as companions, close enough to hear a whispered sigh in the darkened corners of the bedchamber, or the creak of heavy doors opening onto moonlit gardens. Among the most vivid features of medieval royalty was the ever-present theater of spectacle, the majestic ceremonies, the richly embroidered banners, the long processions winding through cobbled streets. These moments were carefully orchestrated not merely for tradition's sake, but to remind every peasant and noble alike that the monarchy was sacred, divine, eternal. But beneath the shining armor and jeweled coronets was often an inner reality far more vulnerable, far more fragile. Take, for instance, the crown jewels, those breathtaking artifacts of gold, silver, and gems that came to symbolize the enduring might of kingship itself. At coronations, monarchs would don a crown forged not only of precious metals but of centuries of expectation. The orb and scepter, the embroidered robes, the bejeweled sword, all were heavy with metaphor and history. And though the people in the crowd might gasp in wonder at the glittering array, few could imagine the pressure those objects exerted upon the shoulders of the one who wore them. For the monarch, these moments of splendor were less about comfort and more about performance. They knew that every eye was watching. The way they walked, the way they nodded, even the way their hand trembled as they held the sacred regalia, all of it was interpreted as a reflection of the strength or weakness of the crown itself. And yet, what ruler has not stood in private afterward, crown removed, and stared into a polished mirror, asking silently whether they were truly enough? Even the garments of the royal household were loaded with significance. A queen's gown was not merely stitched for beauty. The fabrics told stories, silks from Byzantium, velvets dyed with rare and costly indigo, pearls sewn by candlelight by nimble fingers over many sleepless nights. The patterns, colors, and embroidery carried messages to the court and beyond. A queen dressed in green and gold might be signaling prosperity or aligning herself with a favored house. A white and silver ensemble could suggest piety, a plea for peace, or a deliberate reminder of a royal birthright. Beneath the weight of all these symbols, how often must these queens have longed to simply wear something soft, simple, unremarkable? To rest without being watched. To weep without a lady-in-waiting catching her breath at the sight. To laugh without a courtier wondering what it meant. As the wind outside your own resting place whispers along the window panes and your body grows heavier, imagine for a moment a chamber within a royal palace at dusk. The queen has just finished her day, a blur of audiences, council meetings, ritual prayers, and ceremonial meals. Her feet ache. Her mind is a forest of tangled thoughts. And now, finally, she is alone, or nearly. A single maid brushes her long hair, carefully, reverently, speaking only when spoken to. The fire crackles low in the hearth. On the writing table rests a half-finished letter to a daughter married off in a foreign land. And in this rare solitude, the queen stares into the flicker of flame, searching not for visions or omens, but simply for a moment of stillness, of being herself. And yet, moments like these were fleeting. For tomorrow, another day awaited, and with it, a fresh array of duties and displays. Royalty did not rest for long. Among the lesser-known truths of medieval kingship is how deeply isolated monarchs could become. Surrounded constantly by others, attendants, guards, scribes, priests, advisors, they were, paradoxically, often the loneliest people in their realm. A king might never draw a bath, put on his own shoes, or write a private letter without someone hovering nearby. His meals were prepared by royal chefs, tasted for poison, and served on golden dishes, but he could not eat in peace. Every bite, every gesture was witnessed. Laughter was political. Silence, dangerous. Even in the comfort of his private rooms, he could rarely be certain that his words were truly his own. A queen, too, lived a life defined by layers of fabric, of formality, of expectations. Her every smile had to reassure, every word inspire confidence. She must comfort the people in time of war, birth sons in time of peace, manage the palace behind the scenes, and walk the narrow path of virtue at all times. If she grieved too openly, it was seen as weakness. If she laughed too freely, it was vanity. If she spoke her mind, she was feared or scorned. And so, often, she said less than she wanted to, felt more than she let show, endured more than anyone truly knew. Imagine now, your body draped in calm, breath as slow as ocean tides, that you walk quietly through the royal nursery. Here, a different rhythm reigns. The cries of infants, the laughter of children, the gentle instructions of nursemaids and tutors fill the space. Royal children were often separated early from their parents, raised in designated wings of the palace where discipline, education, and decorum were tightly enforced. A young prince might learn his letters alongside swordplay, his prayers alongside the names of foreign provinces he might someday inherit. A princess might be trained in music and languages, not for leisure but for use, skills she would one day deploy to charm a foreign court far from home. Few of these children were raised with indulgence. Even games were organized around etiquette. Play was permitted, but only when it did not interrupt the schedule of tutors and chancellors and prayers. The smallest misstep, a spilled goblet, a forgotten title, a wrong curtsy, might be corrected harshly, not out of cruelty, but because the stakes were so high. The child was not simply a person, but a symbol, a vessel for lineage, a pawn in a larger game of blood and power. Yet despite this, many royal families knew affection. Letters survive between mothers and sons, filled with worry and longing. Kings sent gifts to daughters in distant lands. Queens begged for news from battlefields where their children fought. They may not have had the closeness that comes with freedom, but love found its way through the cracks in stone. Picture Eleanor again, in her later years, now bent with age but still sharp in mind, penning one final letter by the flickering light of a lamp. Perhaps she smiles softly as she remembers a youthful quarrel with Henry or one of Richard's boyhood escapades. Her world was built on power and politics, yes, but inside that world beat a heart still tender, still human. And in that, we can find her truest legacy. Let your breath move like a soft wind now, in and out and in again. You are floating gently through time, the past unfolding like a scroll beneath your fingertips. The lives of kings and queens, so distant in their grandeur, have drawn near to you tonight, speaking not in proclamations or royal decrees, but in the language of shared humanity. You, too, have worn burdens unseen by others. You, too, have sought peace in the quiet of your own thoughts. And just as they once rested beneath stars unchanged across the centuries, so may you now find rest. Let sleep come to you not as an escape, but as a gentle chamber of restoration. Let the voices of history fade to silence, like the final notes of a lullaby echoing through the vaulted halls of a forgotten palace. Let the crown slip gently from the thoughts of your mind, and feel the cool softness of dreams wrap around you like a cloak of night. Sleep now, dear dreamer. You have walked far in noble footsteps. The story will wait. The world will wait. But for now, you have permission to simply be still. The night has grown deeper now, and so have your breaths, slow, steady, as if you are cradled by the velvet darkness that gently surrounds you. With each exhale, you let go of time. With each inhale, your mind opens further to the stories long past, soft echoes of lives once lived under the weight of crowns and the hush of candles. And so we remain in the presence of these ancient figures, not as distant observers, but as quiet listeners, witnesses to their tenderness, their burdens, and the secret corners of their hearts. Let us travel deeper still, to other rulers whose names may not be etched in every textbook, but whose lives shimmer with meaning when seen through the lens of stillness and care. There was a king, long ago, whose name carried thunder, but whose heart beat often in silence. Charles V of France, known as Charles the Wise, ruled not with bombast, but with books. He gathered manuscripts like others gathered gold. His library, kept carefully within the Louvre before it was ever a museum, held hundreds of precious volumes, each a window to the past, to philosophy, to the arts. And though his court was embroiled in strife, and his lands often threatened by enemies both foreign and domestic, Charles believed in ideas, in strategy, in wisdom over brute force. He was, in many ways, a quiet monarch, a rarity among men of power in his time. When Charles passed away, he left behind more than a kingdom, he left behind a beacon. That a king might be remembered not for battles won but for minds illuminated was, in itself, revolutionary. His love for knowledge became a legacy, passed on to those who came after, to those who looked beyond the sword for solutions. But not all monarchs found such clarity. Some were swept into currents they did not understand, trapped by circumstance and born into roles they never wished for. Consider Richard II of England, crowned at only 10 years old, a child king surrounded by ambitious nobles and scheming lords. His reign, marked by confusion, uprisings, and missteps, ended not with glory, but with betrayal and death. And yet, even Richard, with all his failings, was deeply human, a boy who never had the luxury of growing slowly, a young man forced to pretend he understood things far beyond his years. It is not easy to wear a crown. It is not easy to know who to trust, when trust might cost you your throne or your life. And so, many monarchs learned to keep their truest thoughts buried deep, hidden behind diplomacy, veiled beneath pageantry. Perhaps this is why so many turned inward, into faith, into philosophy, into private journals that no one would read until centuries had passed. Let your breath become lighter now. Let it carry you into the quiet minds of those who ruled from within. Imagine a queen kneeling in her chapel, hands folded, praying not for victory in war, but for the safe return of a beloved child. Imagine a king watching snow fall outside his study window, thinking not of conquest, but of a song he once heard his mother sing. These moments were never painted on canvas. They were not recorded in proclamations. But they were real, nonetheless. Real and sacred. There is another side of royalty seldom spoken of in chronicles, the cost of grief. Monarchs were expected to endure tragedy with grace, to lose a child, a spouse, a comrade, and still rise the next day in fine robes, to address the court as if nothing had changed. But they were not immune to sorrow. Queen Catherine of Valois, for instance, lived a life woven with loss. She married Henry V of England, a man both revered and feared. Their union was brief, for Henry died young, leaving her widowed with an infant son, Henry VI, who would become one of England's most troubled kings. As a widow, Catherine was vulnerable. She was monitored, restrained, and eventually, quietly remarried in a match kept hidden from court for fear of political scandal. Her second husband was not a prince or a nobleman, but a servant, a man of lesser birth, yet of strong heart. They had several children, and for a time, lived far from the noise of politics. But even this peace could not last. When their secret marriage was discovered, laws were passed to punish any royal widow who dared follow her heart again. Catherine's story is a quiet one. No grand wars. No defiant speeches. Just the steady pulse of a woman who tried to find happiness in a world that offered her little freedom. Her story reminds us that royalty could be as confining as it was empowering, that crowns could choke as much as they could elevate. Let that truth soften your thoughts now. Inhale peace, exhale tension. There were queens who danced only once in their lives. Kings who never tasted a ripe fig. Children raised to rule who never knew a parent's lullaby. Behind the stone walls and the silk curtains were hearts that beat with quiet dreams, dreams that often went unrealized, but not unloved. Let us, in our rest, honor these quieter dreams. Imagine them like lanterns floating down a river at night, soft lights moving slowly in the dark, carrying the hopes of kings and queens who once stared at the same moon that now glows outside your window. You may never wear a crown, but your mind, your breath, your longing for peace, these are the same elements that have shaped human hearts for all of time. And so we arrive at another monarch, Queen Anne of Bohemia, the gentle and generous wife of King Richard II. Unlike many royal marriages, Anne and Richard's was one of genuine affection. She spoke with kindness, brought new customs to the English court, and softened Richard's sometimes stormy nature. When she died young, the king was shattered. He ordered her palace destroyed, unable to bear the memories it held. He wore black for a year, refusing to celebrate festivals or receive visitors. It was one of the few times history glimpses the fragile soul behind a monarch's mask. Anne's presence, though brief, left ripples. She helped introduce the ideas of humanism to England, encouraged learning and artistry, and reminded those around her that even quietness has power. In a world of thunderous rulers, her stillness sang like a bell in mist. Let your own stillness deepen now. Let it settle into your chest, your arms, your legs. Your body need not move. Your thoughts need not strain. You are held here, gently, between centuries, floating alongside the lives of people whose world was very different, and yet whose hopes were not so distant from your own. In the hush of your breath, hear the rustle of velvet along a chapel aisle. Smell the faint scent of lavender crushed into linens. Feel the warmth of a fire lit before dawn as a queen stirs in her sleep and a page tiptoes past her door. This is not just a story. It is a lullaby sewn from memory. A thread between you and those who came before. And in that thread, woven in silver and shadow, you are safe. Sleep now. The torches are dim. The castle is still. And the kings and queens of history, for a while, rest beside you. The stars are high now, quiet and unwavering, scattered across the dark velvet sky like tiny lanterns left behind by time. Each breath you take slows the clock a little more. In and out. Inhale calm, exhale memory. You are floating now, gently, effortlessly, through corridors of history where every stone remembers a footstep, every page remembers a name, and every shadow once held the breath of a king or queen, paused between duty and dreams. Tonight, we wander further into the lives of those monarchs who lived not in the blinding light of legend, but in the softened glow of resilience. Their names may not thunder through classrooms or echo in every history book, but their stories were just as rich, just as real, and just as human. Let us visit Queen Joan of Navarre, a woman whose life threaded together France, Spain, and England. First married to the Duke of Brittany, she served as Duchess with grace and intelligence. When her husband died, she managed the duchy on behalf of their young son. But her second marriage, to King Henry IV of England, brought her into the eye of a storm, political intrigue, distrust from nobles, and at times, open hostility. Despite this, Joan remained poised. She was no stranger to power, nor to the loneliness it often brought. Later in her life, she was accused, falsely, of practicing witchcraft, imprisoned within her own palaces, her jewels confiscated, her voice silenced. Though eventually released, the wound left behind never fully healed. And yet, she endured. Quiet strength defined her. She wrote letters, managed her properties, and remained dignified until the end. Her legacy is not one of grand battles or sweeping reforms, but of grace in the face of injustice. A queen not remembered for shouting, but for surviving. Let that stillness settle in you now. Let your breath lengthen. Feel the echo of her silence. There is strength in gentleness. There is power in dignity. In another time, in another castle, there lived King James I of Scotland, a ruler, poet, and captive. Taken hostage as a boy by the English, he was held for nearly 2 decades before returning to his homeland as king. While in captivity, he received a remarkable education. He studied not just politics, but art and poetry, philosophy and languages. And perhaps most remarkably, he fell in love. He wrote of his beloved Lady Joan in verses that still survive, painting her not as an ornament of court, but as the center of his world. Upon his release and return to Scotland, he ruled with determination, seeking to reform a fractured realm, but he ruled, always, with the soul of a writer. Imagine him now, quill in hand, candle burning low. His robe slips from one shoulder as he leans over a page, lost in rhythm. His palace around him is silent. His guards stand outside. But inside, his mind is wide and wandering, not among tax laws or land disputes, but in metaphors, in memory, in the gentle shape of words. For him, kingship and creativity were not separate things. They were twin branches of the same tree. How many other monarchs dreamed not of war, but of art? Of gardens and starlight and a simple song sung by someone they loved? Those moments were fleeting, fragile as frost on a castle window pane. But they existed. And we remember them now, here, together. Let your breath move like a tide beneath your ribs. Let your thoughts soften into mist. You are walking among stories now, not bound by time, not held by distance. Just gently held, gently swayed by the rhythm of what was once real. Across the Channel, in Spain, Queen Isabella I of Castile reigned with fierce intellect and unstoppable energy. Her partnership with King Ferdinand II helped unify a divided nation. Together, they sponsored the voyages that would open the New World to European eyes. And yet, Isabella's story is more than conquest. She was a devout woman, yes, but also a strategist, a negotiator, and a mother. She navigated civil war, religious upheaval, and shifting alliances with clear intent. And behind every decision, there was a woman who bore the cost of each choice not just in treaties and taxes, but in her soul. Imagine her alone in her prayer chamber, her fingers resting on a rosary worn smooth by repetition. She prays not only for victory, but for wisdom, for strength, for the lives her decisions will alter, perhaps even end. She is not unfeeling. She is not merely ambitious. She is burdened, knowing that to wear the crown is to be the axis upon which thousands of lives turn. The magnitude of such responsibility can scarcely be imagined. But tonight, in your stillness, perhaps you can feel it gently. Not as weight, but as reverence. And not far from Isabella, a century later, came her great-granddaughter, Catherine of Aragon. Raised in Spanish courts, schooled in languages, politics, and theology, Catherine married into the Tudor dynasty with all the hopes of two nations resting on her shoulders. She was first married to Prince Arthur, who died young. Then, she became the first wife of Henry VIII. For many years, their union was strong. She served as regent while Henry campaigned abroad, even organizing defenses against invaders. But time, and Henry's growing desire for a male heir, shifted the sands beneath her feet. She was cast aside, her marriage declared invalid, her titles stripped. Yet she remained steadfast, insisting always that she was the true queen. She lived not in grandeur, but in grace, even when exiled from court, even when denied her daughter, even when the world turned its back. Imagine her now, seated at a wooden writing desk in the cool light of dawn. A plain shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her ink-stained hands trembling slightly as she writes to her daughter, Mary. The tone of her letter is warm, not bitter. She tells her to be brave, to hold on to her sense of truth, and to remember always that love endures beyond politics, beyond crowns, beyond time. Let those words rest inside you. Let them drift through your thoughts like snow falling on ancient stone. Let them melt into your breath, soft and pure. So many rulers were remembered for their battles. But there is another kind of courage, the courage of loyalty. Of love that holds firm. Of dignity that does not crack beneath public shame. Tonight, you have walked through many stories. And yet, you have not walked alone. These monarchs, though long gone, are companions to your dreaming mind. Their palaces may be dust, their portraits faded, but their humanity glows as gently as candlelight in memory. Let your breath slow once more. In and out. Let your chest fall into stillness. You are no longer tethered to the ticking of the world. You are floating, weightless, in the soft current of time. The pages are turning, but not toward endings, only into silence. Sleep, dear dreamer. The castle gates are closed. The throne room is dark. But the souls who once dwelled there have not left you. They are here, keeping watch, as you drift through a night filled with ancient peace. The world is very quiet now. The winds have softened into stillness. The stars have faded into a velvet blur above, and all across the ancient kingdoms of memory, not a single curtain stirs. You are resting now in a place that exists between breath and dream, between history and silence. As you lie still, your body gently cradled by warmth and peace, your mind continues to drift alongside the voices of those who wore crowns, not only of gold, but of grief, of grace, of quiet endurance. Let us walk now, softly, into the life of Mary, Queen of Scots. Her name is often spoken with a tangle of romance and tragedy, her image cloaked in mystery and myth. Crowned a queen when still an infant, married to a French prince as a teenager, widowed young, and returned to a homeland fraught with conflict, Mary was a queen whose life moved in waves of loss and longing. She lived in a time when a woman in power was often distrusted, especially one as elegant and educated as she. Mary loved poetry, music, and fine needlework. She wrote letters full of yearning and hope. She was a mother, a widow, a political prisoner, and eventually a condemned woman. Betrayed and imprisoned by her cousin, Elizabeth I of England, she spent years confined in a series of cold stone castles. But even there, Mary held herself with dignity. She read. She prayed. She dreamed. On the morning of her execution, she dressed with care, black satin gown, a crimson underdress, a crucifix in her hand. She walked to the scaffold with poise, forgiving her accusers. To the very last, she was not only queen, but a symbol of resilience, of elegance under pressure. She died with her head high and her heart full of faith. Let her final breath echo now only as a whisper, a moment of stillness. Let it pass through your thoughts like a feather on wind, soft, reverent, never hurried. Inhale and exhale. You are safe. You are here. Not far away, in another kingdom, another queen reigned with a different kind of power, Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. Daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, she rose from peril and political imprisonment to become one of the most iconic rulers in English history. But her crown was not without cost. She chose never to marry, saying that she was wedded to her realm. Her court was filled with admirers and poets, advisors and spies. Her speeches stirred armies. Her wit held lords in awe. But behind the armor of her intelligence, Elizabeth was often alone. She aged without a family of her own. She watched friends pass away. And though her reign was long and powerful, her nights, like everyone's, were spent in solitude. In the soft flicker of her bedchamber, she would remove her elaborate wig, her painted mask of courtly presentation, and gaze into the mirror not as a queen, but as a woman wondering if she had done enough. Had she ruled well? Had she loved deeply, even if privately? Had she given everything she could? Even queens ask these questions. Even monarchs wonder what might have been. And so we turn one final time to the pages of the past, to find the quieter threads that wove themselves through the lives of rulers across continents, across generations. The routine of daily royal life, so often invisible to history, was filled with small human gestures. The sharing of fruit on a shaded terrace. A dog resting beneath the throne. the soft murmur of a lullaby from queen to child. These moments, never recorded, were just as real as battles or treaties. As your breath continues, slow and deep, your imagination wide open like an ancient courtyard under starlight, picture the royal gardens at twilight. Gravel paths wind between hedges. The air is fragrant with lavender and rosemary. A fountain trickles in the distance. Somewhere, a child runs barefoot, laughing before being called inside. A queen sits quietly on a carved bench, her eyes on the sky. She doesn't speak. She just watches. And in her stillness, she finds peace. So much of royalty was about being seen. But in the privacy of dusk, in the privacy of the mind, kings and queens were like everyone else, searching, wondering, hoping. They loved music, longed for letters, grieved in silence. They feared war. They feared being forgotten. They feared themselves. And yet they endured. They lived. They left behind traces, not just in laws and buildings, but in dreams. And tonight, you have dreamed with them. You have breathed with them. You have sat beside them in cold chambers and warm gardens. You have seen the world through their eyes, not from atop a throne, but from the heart that beat beneath the robe. Now, there is nothing more to do. You have traveled far. You have listened well. The story has unfolded gently and completely. The kings and queens of the past return now to their slumber. The castles close their gates. The letters are sealed. The candles have burned to stubs. And you? You are safe. You are still. You are resting in the softest shadow of time. Let your thoughts now drift away from words. Let the images fade like mist in morning light. There is no need to remember. There is no need to think. The journey is complete, and your breath is the only thing left that moves, rising and falling like the tide against ancient shores. Sleep now. The stories will wait. The crowns have been set down. The court is dismissed. Only peace remains.